Hi, my name's Tim Westbrook, and I love being sober. The one thing I love almost as much as being sober is hearing stories about other people being sober. My dream with this podcast is to have people call the I Love Being Sober line to share their story of how they heard something here that helped them get sober. Today, I'm here with Michael Walsh. Michael is a master's level addiction professional, an interventionist, a coach, and a treatment industry consultant with over 20 years of professional experience. He is the former president and CEO of the National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers. He managed the Association of Intervention Specialists and was liaison to ASAM for the treatment industry. He is a current C4 Recovery Solutions and Florida Alliance of Recovery board member. Mr. Walsh has spoken nationally and internationally on addictive disorders and has testified as expert witness. Michael, welcome. So glad to have you. Thanks for being.
Thanks, Tim. Good to be here.
Yeah. So, good stuff. Times are. I've spoken with you for a little while here, and we've been in the middle of this pandemic and times are a little bit different. How have you been handling yourself?
You know, I pinch myself because I hear stories of my friends that are freaking out, and I watch the news occasionally. But, you know, I've been on a Zoom meeting every morning at 6 a.m. our time with a couple of guys around the country that I do a lot of work with, probably over the last 13, 14 years, personal work. They all work in the industry, but are all in recovery. And so that's how I start my day off. And then I've got a couple of Zoom meetings that I've been in on regularly. And it's been like a working staycation. You know, I would say since the beginning of March, I've had maybe 2 days where I wasn't on that pink cloud. But I was talking to my sponsor the other night. I said, I don't know if I'm on a pink cloud or in denial. But whatever it is, it seems to be working for me. I laugh a lot in recovery. I don't mean to trivialize if somebody's struggling today, because believe me, I know this too shall pass. I know that I'll have days where I'm struggling a little bit more, but I got to say, for the most part, the coronavirus is giving me time to reflect, get out of my comfort zone a little bit. And, I do feel for the newcomer, because there's something about walking in and getting that physical hug, I think, in early recovery that you just don't get on Zoom.
Right.
But then again, thank God for Zoom. If this happened 30 years ago, we would have been a whole lot more isolated.
Yeah. No, I can relate totally just with this whole pandemic. Same thing for me. It's allowed me to slow down and just embrace kind of what's happening, and I'm in acceptance and just going with it, and lots of time to myself, lots of prayer, meditation. I have a handful of guys that I stay connected to, which is important. Like, I gotta stay connected to these guys and in recovery, because those are
just another opportunity to practice powerlessness, huh?
Yeah. Tim's not in control, right? Right. Yeah, it's just a lot easier when I'm not in control. When I'm in control, it's that's when it's exhausting, it's overwhelming, and nothing ever happens exactly the way that I try to make it. You know what I mean? So it's good. So let's. I'd like to start by kind of hearing a little bit about your background and kind of how you ended up in recovery. Let's start.
Well, I'll give you the abbreviated version. When I lead off a meeting, I just say, well, when I was 3,
Right.
So, when I was getting out of college, I had been a pretty successful, I would say, drinker, at least in my mind up to that point. There were some consequences for sure, which I figured out later on. But really, the heat got turned up after college. I was accepted to law school, and instead of going to law school, I took a job working for Anheuser-Busch.
Brilliant.
I did quality control for Anheuser-Busch, which was one of the best things I've ever done and one of the worst things I've ever done.
Right.
And that led, I did that for a couple of years, and there was a lot of drinking, obviously, in that industry, which led to a lot of other things. And I knew intuitively that I was drinking more. I always knew I was, I could hold my liquor, and I wore that as a badge of pride. But working in that industry gave me kind of a license to, be a professional drinker. That was my excuse. And after a couple of years, and I looked around the industry, and I saw a lot of guys, especially that had been former athletes, and I was an athlete, and they didn't look good. I didn't know they were alcoholic, but I knew they didn't look good. So I left that industry and, did some other things. I had some really good jobs. I had a securities license. I was doing some stuff, but I tended to go hard when I went. And that led to an intervention by the Massachusetts State Police.
Wow.
And that was my moment of clarity, if you will. A lot of things happened. Grace of God, I didn't go to jail. I wound up, I was talking to somebody, and people talk about, do you believe in God? Do you believe in coincidences? I was almost 2 years sober, and I was waiting to go to jail still to see if I was going to go to jail because I was guilty. I got caught. I was willing to face the music and trying to get sober so I'd have a life afterwards. And I, at the same time, I was coaching Team Massachusetts. I was, former altar boy, choir boy. I was, I had politicians and police officers, kids on my teams I coached. I insured a couple of hospitals and a police department. And, there's this whole other life. And in college, I had been a counselor for juvenile delinquents, which is ironic. So I always liked this mental health psychology. I just didn't feel like I had found a spot there, went into business. Well, when I got sober, somebody had asked me what I wanted to do. I said, I'd like to do something I believe in as much as I did when I worked for Anheuser-Busch. When I worked for Anheuser-Busch, I believed in that product. I loved my job. It was, pinch me, I get paid to do this. And ironically, the next morning, I got a call from my lawyer who said that the cop that arrested me got suspended for falsifying a police report. Had nothing to do with me, but if I didn't get in trouble for 5 more years, then the statute of limitations would be up because I was already 2 years sober. And about 5 minutes after that, I got a call from my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and she worked at the treatment center we had gone through, and they were looking for somebody to do marketing. And I just looked up at the sky and said, I don't know who you are or what you are, but I'm listening. Yeah. And I got my first job in the field in marketing. Heard a guy named William White speak. I think you know that name, Slang the Dragon. Yeah. And I walked in. Most of the marketers were going out to have breakfast, and I just walked in to hear what the topic was. And William White changed my life again. I mean, I heard him speak. I went up and talked to him afterwards. I went to school and got a master's degree in substance abuse counseling, and on and on and on. And so, my journey to recovery and then to the industry was really, I believe, God. I knew I wanted to do something, but I wasn't in control of it. I couldn't have told you, I want to work in, I didn't even know they had a business part of treatment. I'd been to treatment, so I figured maybe I'll be a counselor. And so it's an interesting, I guess to me, it's interesting that, I kept taking jobs that I thought I wanted and I thought I should do. And then when I just kind of gave it up and said, I'd like to do something to help people, this kind of fell in my lap. In that 2 years after I got out of treatment to when I got this job, I had applied for so many jobs. I stayed in South Florida. I wasn't going back to Massachusetts. I had given up my securities license, and I went for these jobs that I kept getting people saying, you're overqualified. And I'm saying, no, I'm not really. I want this job. And I couldn't get a job. And I realized now, thank God I didn't get one of those other jobs that I thought I wanted, because I wouldn't have been looking for a job when this job came up. There's a saying, one door closes, the other door opens. God closes a door, he opens a window. I mean, all that stuff I've found to be true. And for me, it was a really good lesson about early recovery, that I was responsible for the footwork. I wasn't responsible for the results. I was responsible for the footwork. And when I trusted the process and I just showed up, things started to happen. And again, getting into this field happened like that. And then progressing in this industry happened like that. You know, it hasn't been a smooth linear line upwards. There's been some blessings and blessings in disguise. I love that term. I heard a guy say that early on. You know, nothing's good or bad in and of itself. It's blessings and blessings in disguise.
Yeah.
Most of us aren't looking forward to those blessings in disguise.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
really are
Like the
opportunities.
coronavirus, right?
Yeah.
So let's back up for a minute. What happened? Like, what was how did you originally get how did you get sober? I mean,
I had friends who had gotten sober, and you know, I toyed with the idea once in a while, but I don't think I understood sober what it meant or what recovery was. I just know that I had guys I grew up with that didn't drink anymore, and I knew they went to this thing called AA. I wasn't curious enough to go to a meeting with them, but I saw it change their lives. You know, there was no doubt that the guys I knew that had gotten sober were different than they had been, significantly different. So that kind of caught my attention, but I was so busy running around, you know, living life or trying to be happy and live life that I was oblivious to what the transformation and what had happened for them. So when I got arrested, I was sitting in a jail cell. My sister actually walked in and said, "What are you willing to do?" And I said, "I'll do anything." And she said, "I don't believe you." And she walked out. And she came back in and she made me an offer I couldn't refuse. She said, "Don't call Dad. Don't call any of your friends. We're going to get you a lawyer. You're going to go to AA. We're going to try to get you into treatment." And there was 99% of me that said, "No way. Like, I know if I make the right phone call, I can make this go away." And she said, I actually said that out loud to her. She said, you know, good chance, you know, between the people you know and Dad knows, maybe you can get this to go away, but nothing's going to change. And there was something in that just little sliver of hope that she had thrown out there that it could be different. And by the next morning, I, you know, it was a beautiful sunny day in Marblehead, Massachusetts. I was ready to go to the beach and tell her I went to a meeting. And I walked into a meeting and I heard an old lady tell her story and she made me laugh and it changed my life. She sat up at the podium and she told a story that on the surface had nothing to do with me or my life, but underneath it, I knew how she felt. I knew what had happened for her. It just grabbed me and pulled me in. And I went from, you know, an hour earlier not wanting to go into that meeting to going to 3 meetings that day.
wow.
3 meetings. I won 3 books. I thought my luck had changed. In Massachusetts, I've come to find out that the newcomer always gets the book in the raffle. Took me a while to figure out how they knew I was a newcomer. Obviously, something about that deer in the headlights look, you know. But the thing that got me there was the Massachusetts State Police, God, and my sister, I guess. The thing that got me was that woman sitting up at the podium, and there was a room full of people, but she was talking to me, and she made me feel good, and she made me laugh, and she made me feel hope.
Okay, so you get your first 24 hours.
Yep.
And then what? Like something shifted at that first meeting is what it sounds.
Yeah, something shifted at that meeting, and you know, I can't tell you honestly that it was all about recovery at that point. I certainly felt better. I was certainly interested in reading the material. I explain it to people that I work with a lot. It's kind of like we see ourselves on this highway and we know we're in the wrong lane and we need to like move over a lane. And where I sit today, I was on the wrong highway. I see that I was on the wrong highway. I was in the wrong highway going in the wrong direction. So, you know, kind of like the difference between making a New Year's resolution and actually following through with it. Most people don't. They make the New Year's resolution, they change a little bit for a short period of time, and then they slide back into the old habits. And recovery for me was that. It was thinking I needed to change lanes. And through, you know, God, luck, circumstances, people that came into my life, I wound up on a different highway going in a different direction. And I'd love to tell you that that was my intention. Early on, it wasn't. I think a couple of things that happened, and we talk about this a lot in the men's group I do, is that I started to feel good. And I think for people in early recovery, if we can get that light at the end of the tunnel where they start to feel good and they want something more than they want to be drunk or high, then it becomes infectious. Then it becomes something you're interested in actually sacrificing for. I remember early on a guy said, it's a simple program, but it's not easy. And a lot of those, little phrases and analogies that I hated early on, they were true. It's not for people who need it or people who want it. It's for people who want it, need it, and are willing to do the work to get it. And again, I'll use the analogy of a New Year's resolution. I can say on December 31st, I'm quitting the ice cream tomorrow, and I'm going to drop 20 pounds in January, and I'm going to go to the gym every day. But I have to actually get up on the 1st and go to the gym and not buy the ice cream and continue to do that day after day, or nothing's going to change. And I think that's why we have a lot of people in this country, probably in the world, that make New Year's resolutions all the time with the best of intentions, but we don't follow through with it. And that's, for me, what recovery has been willing to go through whatever it takes to continue the journey. Because life happens. You get sober and it's not perfect. People around you don't change, circumstances don't change. You just get an opportunity if you keep doing this thing to, there's a book, A New Pair of Glasses. And that's another great analogy. I see the world differently today. My priorities are different today. My perspective is different today. And I think that another important thing I'd like anybody who might be listening to hear is, we spend whatever part of our life getting to the point where we walk into a meeting or we walk into a treatment center or sober living. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a progression to get to that point where this is what we need. But we have this fantasy that some, finite period of time, like, a week or 10 days or a month or 90 days is going to fix us. And to me, that's the big disservice that we do to people, because we talk about a day at a time. We don't explain a lot about why it takes so long. Remember early on, I asked an old timer how, he said, you want to know how long it takes to get 10 years of sobriety? And I said, yeah. And he said, 10 years. That happened overnight. I didn't get to the point where I was arrested and looking at jail time overnight. That took years. And it wasn't all bad. There was good, bad, and ugly all in there. Recovery was the same thing. And the great thing about it, recovery is just like you can get as far off the track as possible before you die. That's kind of the end of using for a lot of us, unfortunately, but you can get off that elevator anytime, they say. You can stay on the elevator on the other side as long as you want to. You don't have to get to a point and say, okay, I'm all better now, I'm going to stay here. My experience is people who do that typically slide backwards. So again, I'm coming up on 22 years by the grace of God. And I was on a 6 a.m. call this morning with a bunch of guys talking about life stuff. I know I'm not better. But I also know if I continue to do what I did the first week today, trust God, clean house, help others, read the book, study it with someone who's got what I want, I can get better and better and better. I don't have bad weeks or months anymore. Sometimes I have a bad couple of hours,
Right. So your recovery, your journey has changed. It's today, this week, last week, last month, it's evolved. And let's talk about that first 30 days to the newcomer. What did you need to do that first 30 days to get to 30? Because that's, there's different, there's checkpoints,
I'll tell you the key thing I remember from early on, because I got asked a lot early on what I was willing to do. What are you willing to do? What are you willing to do? It seemed a natural question, And then I remember I was talking to a guy and I said, I think I'm willing to do anything. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And he said, are you willing to be uncomfortable? And that was huge because I couldn't remember the last time I had been willing to be uncomfortable. Like I knew how to change how I felt. I could change it with drugs and alcohol instantly, you know. Being asked that question, and that was really, I think, an important one for me because being willing to be uncomfortable allowed me to stay clean and sober through the hard times in early recovery. People talk about a pink cloud. I had a pretty good run of a pink cloud. I know people that, you know, they don't even understand what you're talking about. I think the journey's different for all of us, but that pink cloud where, you know, as bad as everything seemed around me with the seemingly sky falling in around me, I felt comfortable. I felt it, you know, safe in this like AA thing and treatment. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, I think I'm okay here. I didn't have to know everything. The hard part about early recovery, we want to know it all. I think a lot of us come in, it's like, okay, we made this decision. We're not drinking and drugging. I want all the information now. I want 10 years of recovery now. And again, that was the thing that people helped me learn is that it was going to take time. I had to learn how to be where my feet were. I had always been willing to look at, you know, things I should have done yesterday. I could have, should have, would have. And I was really good at projecting out into the future, like I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. The place that was really uncomfortable for me was being right here, right now. Sit on this call with you, not worrying about what I have to do an hour from now, not worrying about what I should have done before we got on this call, but being present, being here right now, because that's the thing to me that recovery is all about. Learning to be present in the moment, doing what I can do right now, staying out of the past and the future so I can be the best possible person I can be right now. When I spend my time and focus on that, and again, it was the same in early recovery, things go really well. Now, again, it's hard to do that in early recovery. You know, if you remember, I mean, I couldn't even read the book. I literally would read a sentence and then my mind would be drifting off somewhere else. And that's okay. You know, I think for the newcomer out there, if you think like you're crazy or there's something wrong with you, we all felt like that early on. I remember at one point saying to a counselor, I had gone to the mall and some of the stuff that came through my mind when I was walking around the mall horrified me. And I sat with this therapist and talked about it. I said, I think I'm crazier now than when I was drinking and drugging. And she said, no, you're just well aware of what you're thinking now.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, it wasn't, and the only difference was I couldn't rationalize and justify crazy thoughts and behaviors anymore. I had to learn how to live. And that I think is the thing that early recovery is about. It's putting the foundational piece in that, you know, I'm a work in progress. I can't regret the past, know what to shut the door on it, as it says in the literature. And I can't change everything all at once. I can just change who I am today and try to be the best, learn. I'll give you an example of going to a meeting and then winding up at the supermarket and feeling all spiritual till I walked in the supermarket and that lady in front of me had 13 items in the 10-item express line. You know, and wanting to just berate her and, you know, embarrass her and shame her into going into a different line. And it got me all worked up. And I remember talking to a guy about it and he said, why were you counting her things? Like, you know, what's that all about? You know, what is it about you that you need to count the items that she had? Maybe you should have turned around and said hi to the person behind you. Maybe they're having a bad day. You know, so that whole mindset changed. Like it was offending me or affronting me because, you know, she had, God forbid, gone into the line with 3 too many items. You know, put that in perspective. It's really not a big deal. Maybe she was in a hurry. Maybe she had a sick child at home. You know, I don't know her. I don't know what's going on in her life. But that kind of stinking thinking is the thing that gets us, I think, a lot wrapped up early in recovery. And for me, it was really another part of it. I just thought of it as I'm talking to you, the people that were put in my path that helped me put things like that into perspective. I remember early on calling a guy one night because I really wanted to get high and he didn't pick up the phone. called and I called and I called, and I didn't get him till the next morning. And I got him, and he said, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, last night, I really needed you, and you didn't pick up." And he said, "I was up to dinner with my wife and kids. What's going on?" And I said, "Well, I really wanted to get high last night." And he said, "Did you?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Congratulations." And he hung up.
There you
And I
go.
called him back, and I said, "Maybe you're not listening to me." He said, "Oh, no, I heard you. This is great. Congratulations." And he hung up. And I called him again, and he said, "Did you pick up last night?" And I said, "No, I didn't," and he hung up. And we went through this thing for 5 or 6 or 7 phone calls. And finally he said, I said, Russ, I don't think you're listening to me. And he said, "Michael, no, you're not listening to you. You just told me that you wanted to pick up last night and you didn't. Have you ever been able to do that before?" And I thought about it and thought, I don't ever remember. Like, it was like the thought and then you use. And he said, "Congratulations, you're getting clean and sober." I wanted to use and I didn't. And that's something that we can teach you here. If you're interested in not using, stick around. There's a whole bunch of people who figured it out. I remember about a year ago, I was talking to a guy up in Rhode Island who was trying to explain to me that he knew how to not do cocaine. He didn't need to do all the things I was talking to him about. The problem was he was sitting across the dining room table from me with 2 Coke spoons, two Coke straws, holding them, talking to me about how to stay clean and not do cocaine. And I finally looked at him when he finished. I said, "Tom, obviously one of us here understands how to not do cocaine, and I don't think it's you." By the 2 straws in your hands. And I told him that story about a week later. And he said, "I had a Coke straw in my hand." I said, "No, you had 2 Coke straws in your hands." He said, "Oh my God." But in that psychosis, that he was in, he thought he had the answer. He was going to tell me how to stay clean. He knew that he had the answer now.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And again, I think for me, it's been realized that I don't have the answers a lot of times. A lot of times I don't even know the questions. But when I get into a situation, I know that there's someone who's done this before me, whether it's the death of a loved one, job, relationship, like people have gone through it and not used. So I think that's why it's so important to find a community of people who are not using, that have done this for a while, that can share their experience, strength, and hope with you. For me, that was really important. When I lost my first loved one, when I went through a death of a family member in recovery, I had never done that since I was a child without drugs or alcohol. So I didn't know how to sit with those feelings. I didn't know how to plan a funeral. I didn't know how to write a eulogy. I didn't know any of that stuff. And people helped me. The people that had done it said, "Simple, sit down, we'll go through A, B, C, D. These are things you need to do." And now I can help someone else do that, because when life stuff happens, a lot of times we freak out. We get way out over our skis. Well, we can't see it clearly. And I have friends now who are dealing with their children coming into recovery, and people that have been doing this a long time. And when it's your child, it's not like when you're talking to someone else's child or someone else about it. It's like all of a sudden you can't see straight in front of you. You think you should be able to handle this and control it because you're the quote unquote expert. When it comes to your loved one, my suggestion is you reach out and ask for help, because other people have had to do it before.
Mm-hmm. Right. So let's clearly the recovery landscape has changed from when you first got sober to now. I mean, today we've got different recovery. We've got 12 steps. We've got different recovery models, like Smart Recovery, Celebrate Recovery, Refuge Recovery. We've got medication-assisted treatment, which is bigger these days. Tell me kind of what you're seeing, like what's working.
So, the good news is there's all kinds of options, and I'll bring it down even to that. I remember 2 years ago talking to a guy that had been doing 20 years then, so 40 years ago. He came in and he said, when he came out, people took people into their homes and detoxed them on their couches, and he said, I don't know that I do today what people did for me early on. That's the bad news. The good news is we have detoxes and medical professionals and treatment centers now that weren't available for all of us back then. Fast forward 20 years plus, when I came in, it was a pretty simple process. There were many options. They weren't as readily available. The internet wasn't pushing, every kind of recovery under the sun. But I think also people didn't come in as early on. Now with the opiate epidemic, we've got these kids that overdose, once, first time they use, and then they get sent off to treatment. I think that, as an industry, I'll speak professionally, we have an opportunity to help more people, but we need to be aware that everyone doesn't fit the same mold. I think that there are very appropriate uses of medication-assisted therapy, but I don't think pharmaceutical companies make as much money as they would like if everybody isn't on patient. So I would caution that, for those people it's appropriate for, and you find good clinicians and medical professionals, fantastic opportunity for those people. I look at it kind of like methadone in the 70s. They don't make money if a few people are on methadone, they make money if everybody's on methadone.
Right.
So when money gets into this, it complicates it. And, you and I have seen that over the last few years in the treatment industry. I mean, there was a period of time not too long ago where we wished that insurance would pay for treatment because people with no money, we had some Salvation Army and, some nonprofits and things that would help people that had no funds. And if you had a lot of money, we could find you great treatment all over the place, because you could afford it. But for the people in the middle, it was a battle. It was a struggle. Good news is insurance started paying for treatment. Bad news is a lot of people got into the treatment industry for different reasons, and maybe not the same reasons you or I got into it. And all of a sudden there were a lot of options that maybe weren't, in my opinion, the best options for people. Take it a step further, a lot of people that got into this industry just had no intention to do anything but make money. So that has really clouded the waters. It's poisoned people's perceptions of what treatment is, what recovery is, I think. Whenever a family calls me, I ask them first thing, they'll say, what's the success rate of A, B, C, D, whatever treatment I'm talking about, inpatient, outpatient, MAT, abstinence, whatever. I ask them what their idea of success looks like, because some people who call me, they want their son or daughter to stop getting arrested or overdosing. Other people want abstinence and a spiritual awakening. And there's a whole bunch of territory in between those two extremes. So, one, we have to look at what is the family system or work looking for. If I'm talking to an EAP for a company, they may not care whether their employee drinks at home at night by themselves, as long as they don't show up to work drunk and don't have drugs in their system when they're working. So, again, I think that there's a lot more assessment and evaluation we need to do today. And I think depending on what someone is looking for, what their circumstances are, again, if I'm talking to you and you're a surgeon, and you don't think there's anything wrong with you doing cocaine the night before surgery, the medical board has a different opinion of that. So I'm going to have a different opinion of what treatment plans should look like because public safety is involved. If you are, the independent businessman who has his own deal and doesn't have public safety issues, I may think you could benefit from stopping cocaine. You may not have any intention to stop doing cocaine. So then there's a whole other conversation in there. And again, what are you willing to do and what do you have to do? So that complicates it a lot. There are a lot of avenues. Again, medication-assisted therapy, I think with the right professionals can be a great thing for some people. Abstinence, absolutely. When I was working with the ASAM board, as you mentioned earlier, and some recovering doctors, there was a lot of talk about if you weren't offering MAT, then you were committing malpractice. And at that time, a lot of 12-step and abstinence-based doctors were not offering MAT. And one of the docs I was with, who'd been around a long time, said, okay, I'll give you that. But if you're not offering abstinence as an alternative to treatment modality, then you're also committing malpractice. And I found that really interesting because a lot of times we have this narrow view of, everybody should do this thing that I'm selling or that I've done. And the reality is there are a lot of different options. I know people that have changed their lives going to church. If that works for you, great. My experience with most people who meet the criteria for dependence is that long-term outcomes are greatly benefited by 12-step recovery plus. And that's my professional opinion. As a person, AA, NA, the other 12-step groups are pretty clear. We have no opinion on outside issues. We do believe that medication is a thing between a doctor and a patient. I think that personally, sometimes it's hard for me to separate my personal and professional opinion, but I really try to do that. And again, the things I want to take into consideration when suggesting a treatment plan for somebody is how many boxes do they check? Like, where are that scale? How many check marks on that alcohol questionnaire do they check? Are they checking 2 boxes or are they checking 20 boxes? How long have they been using? What drugs are they using? What's their profession? What's their family life look like? What are their goals and objectives? And again, just because I think they can benefit from abstinence and a spiritual awakening, that doesn't mean that's what they're coming to me looking for as a professional. They may be looking to stop getting arrested. As a professional, I got to either not see that client or help them find something that fits them. If it's an intervention, it's a different story. If it's an intervention in a state where there are commitment laws, another story. I hear a lot that you can't do anything if they're not ready for help. Well, some states you can do a lot if they're not ready for help. Massachusetts, for a long time didn't have much. Florida has a great law, the Marchman Act. Kentucky's got a law called the Kentucky 222. If you're a concerned family member or friend in states like that, Casey's Law, it's called in Kentucky, you can take someone and try to make them get some help. You can't make them get clean and sober, but you can help them get started, you can plant the seed. So that's the thing. The alternatives like smart recovery and things like that, I'm learning more about them. I think more comes out every day. What I caution people, if you're looking for alternatives, is read the data and read all the data, because you can Google on the internet and you can find that marijuana is good for you. It doesn't affect your brain. You can find pretty much anything on the internet to back up the argument you're trying to make. But there are a lot of good outcome studies on 12-step recovery, on DBT and CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. For alcoholics and drug addicts, abstinence-based programs plus therapy, whether it's trauma work, CBT, DBT, whatever your issues are, those tend to have the best outcomes. And the longer someone's engaged in therapy, the better. I'll give you an analogy, and I think it might come up in another question, but since I'm on it, I went to the doctor for high cholesterol years ago. He said, you're not over the line, but you're up at the high level. And if you don't get it down, I'm going to want you to take medication. And I was kind of against medication at that time. I didn't want to take a statin. And he said, with your history and with your father's heart history, I want it way down. I threw out the Ben and Jerry's, went to the gym. I was committed to, getting my blood work better. And 6 months later, it was about the same. 6 months later, it was about the same. I look at that period of time like the New Year's resolution now. Like, he gave me A, B, C, D, and E to do. I started to do a little bit of it, and I never followed through for a long period of time. He finally wrote a prescription for Lipitor. And I said, Doc, I don't want to do that. He said, I gave you a couple of years. You got to take it. And I said, give me 6 months. He said, Michael, I just gave you 2 years. I said, Mark, give me 6 months. I'll get it down. 6 months later, it was down over 100 points. I walked in, he had the results, and he looked at me and said, oh my God, what'd you do? I said, Doc, I did what you told me to do 3 years ago.
Yeah.
He didn't get any smarter. I followed the prescription, and that's, I think, what somebody goes to a good treatment program, if you follow that prescription, you're probably going to get good results. If you find somebody that you want to be a mentor or a sponsor and you ask them how they got what they got, hopefully it's peace of mind, success, whatever that is for you. They're going to give you suggestions on what they did. If you do what they did, you'll probably get something close to what they got. If you take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and do it for a short period of time and stop and start, you're probably not going to get what they got. So,
yeah, I think I'm hearing a lot in what you're saying, and what I'm hearing you say, there's lots of different ways for somebody to get clean and sober.
Yeah.
There's lots of there's treatment, there's detox, there's smart recovery, there's refuge recovery, there's 12 steps. NAAA, there's so many, and it's kind of like, I think about, there's a guy named Jason Grasso, he was talking about superfoods, and he said, there's no such thing as a superfood, like a superfood for you might not be a superfood for me, and vice versa. Like, we all have different foods that our bodies really like. And I think for somebody that really wants recovery, or maybe they don't even want recovery yet, their family wants them to want recovery. And getting into recovery, it's like, how do they find the right path? Because it's daunting. I mean, to not know anything about recovery, to want recovery, or to want recovery for your son or your daughter or your spouse, and to pick up the phone and to just start calling people and to look on the internet, it's overwhelming. What's your suggestion? And I think we're leading into really kind of the art and science of intervention here, because it's, so let's talk about, like, how can somebody find the right path for them?
So I think what a lot of people fall into is that it's got to be one or the other. If I don't choose one, then I'm not doing it right. And to me, you said it earlier, you go to the gym, you may like free weights. I might like running. Somebody else might like swimming. If you don't try all those different things, you're probably not going to find the one that really fits you, I think that if you don't want to drink and drug anymore and you want to feel better, like figuring out a way not to drink and drug while you try a bunch of different stuff. I remember early on, I wanted to get into some kind of faith. I had been raised in a religion and I was kind of curious, and the guy said, well, why don't you go to a bunch of different churches? So a buddy of mine in early recovery, we started going to different churches every Sunday. And it was interesting because I thought I knew about different religions. I didn't. Like, when I actually went and sat in the church, I realized some are very similar, others are different. I didn't have any idea. Like, how would I know? A guy said one time, you wouldn't know how to cut the grass if somebody hadn't shown you how to cut the grass. I found that I like hot yoga. A lot of people were telling me I should meditate and do things like that. And I struggled with yoga and meditation. I tried hot yoga. I loved it. When I talk about the art and science of intervention, I do a presentation on this. There are things that we know that work that help change your brain chemistry. Okay, drinking and drugging will change your brain chemistry. In my opinion, not in a good way. So you take the drugs and alcohol out. What's going to make you feel good? Some people like skydiving. Some people get a lot of good feeling out of faith. Some people, it might be heavy exercise, eating right. For a lot of us, it's a combination in different levels of a bunch of those different things. Cognitive behavioral therapy might be better for somebody, where experiential therapy might be better for somebody else. How do you know if you don't try it? So what I like to do is explain to people that these are some of the options out there. These are the ones that I've been able to uncover. These are the things that work about them physiologically and in the brain. And then the art part, that's the science part of it. The art part of it is figuring out which works for you or I. That's kind of like painting a picture. I'm not very good at that. My wife's a great artist. I didn't think I could draw at all. Through practice, I can fiddle around a little bit now. It's not as bad as it used to be. I'm never going to be what she is with a paintbrush or with chalk or with any of those mediums that artists use. But it makes her really happy. And I've found that I can do it. I used to be reluctant to even try it. So when you're talking about, what kind of therapy is going to work for a person, I think you don't know until you try. The other thing I would encourage people to do is keep trying, because I do some things now that I didn't want to do early in recovery because they didn't feel as good, but I've evolved, I've changed, like we talked about earlier. And there are so many different things that we find out every day. There are new types of therapy that comes out. EMDR, I'll give you EMDR as an example. I tried EMDR early on and I wasn't a big fan of it. Didn't seem to do anything for me. Years later, I tried it again, loved it. Now, was it because I was more receptive then? Was it a different practitioner, so she was better? I don't know. I can't tell you. All I can tell you is that I tried it once, wasn't a fan, didn't continue to do it. Years later, it was suggested to me. I tried it again, and I had phenomenal results with it. So I think that that's like the food. What's good for you might not be good for me. I think if we're willing to be uncomfortable and try a bunch of different things, and the important pieces, and an old timer said this to me a long time ago, it'd probably work better if you're not drinking and drugging. So whether it's religion, whether it's cognitive, whatever kind of therapy, whether it's 12-step therapy, whether it's MAT, if you're not drinking and drugging on top of it, it's probably going to work better.
Right. Okay. So let's say, somebody wants to, they're interested, they want to find recovery, they're open to all these different things, but how do you say just to try them? Like, how do they find the appropriate therapist, treatment center? I mean, and I know there's lots of, it's just
not all created equal.
Yeah, they're not all created equal. It's like, man, how does somebody find a good ethical treatment option, or how do they get on the right path?
One of the things I recommend to people is, if calling a professional like me, if you find somebody who's licensed and certified, that's a good start, but not all of them get to travel. I'm lucky. I've gotten to see a lot of different programs, and I know some talented clinicians who are much better clinicians than I am. But when they're looking to send somebody away, they'll call somebody like me because they're in their office. They don't travel and see all this different stuff. Getting an evaluation is a great idea. When I went to treatment, I think they asked me over 200 questions before they tried to talk me into their treatment program to see if I was appropriate. Yeah. If you call a place and there's like 3 questions, like, do you want to come? How much money do you have? Maybe look for another program. I would want to know more about you. If I was running a program, I would want to know that you were appropriate for us. If you're in a state or a position where you can't afford to go get a good evaluation, I recommend to people call the lawyers group, the doctors group, maybe the nurses group in that state, because they'll have a good list of qualified providers. Because public safety is on the line, the people that run the physicians recovery program, for example, in each state, they need to know the treatment programs in their state. Like, doctors don't get to go to any treatment program they want. Typically, they need to go to one of these programs. If they want to go back to work and they want to keep their license in good standing, they need to pick one of these programs that have been vetted by the medical association, usually called, the part of the medical association in each state called the Physicians Recovery Network or Federation of State Physicians Program. Whatever it is in your state, if they send doctors to that program, probably a good program. So there are ways for everyone to vet, if you will. I wouldn't do it through Google. God bless Google, but programs are sold. They bought and sold. They change hands. Clinical directors leave. All kinds of things happen, and it's not going to get updated as quickly. So call around, ask a few professionals. If you call 3 therapists and say, I need somebody that can help me find the right treatment program, if they each give you 3 names and there was one name that all 3 of them gave you, maybe call that guy or that girl.
Yeah.
That's some of the simple stuff I do. But always, you want someone with experience. I see a lot of LinkedIn profiles that say extensive experience. And then when you go through the years, you can see that gap from like a year and a half, 2 years ago when they probably went to treatment. Right. So just because it says seasoned treatment executive in the profile, if you look at the work history, may not be as seasoned as you or I would like.
Right. So let's go back to the physicians board, and find, so can anybody, even if they're not a physician, if they're not a dentist, if they're not an airline, can anybody call one of those boards?
I don't know what their officials are, but I've never called one of those hotlines and given good information. They will ask if I'm a doctor, and I'll say, no, I'm just, new to your state, like say Connecticut, for instance. I don't do a lot of work there. I imagine if I called the Connecticut Federation program, they would say, you can't come through our program because you're not a doctor, but we can tell you what programs we send people to. So again, I think it would be unusual to get somebody that wouldn't be helpful to anyone reaching out, because, it's an important part of what they do. They're public service organization first, and an advocacy. So, I don't think they would tell you if they thought a place was a bad program, but I think they would tell you if they referred people there. So
right, and I think that, and one thing I want to point out is the success rate of physicians that get sober and stay sober is much higher than the average person.
It's the only study that I have quoted the recovery rates over the years. And the reason we know pretty much what their rates of recovery are is because they drug test up to 5 years.
Right.
And that's really where the rubber meets the road. There's a lot of people that have tried some really good outcome studies, but when you're going on self-report, I can tell you that people have reported that their lives have gotten better by calling them. That doesn't mean that they're clean and sober. That doesn't mean that their lives have gotten better. Dr. Barthwell, who was on Office of National Drug Control team, somebody asked her at a conference one time, if someone's an ABAM doctor, does that mean they're a good doctor, a good addiction doctor? And she said, not necessarily. It means they passed the test and they did the education. If you want to know if they're a doctor, you need to find out if they're a good doctor. So if you want to know if I'm a good interventionist, I'm licensed and certified and all of that. And I've been doing this a long time, but I talk to people I've worked with, families I've worked with, treatment centers I've worked with, find out what they think of me. Because I might have a really high opinion of myself. Other people might not. So I think real important when we look at recovery rates, we look at things like pilots and physicians, because the evidence there isn't just that we called them and they told us how they're doing. We've actually drug tested them over a long period of time, and we know that their rates are so much greater than the general public.
Right, and what
they do is time, 3 to 5 years in most cases.
And so outcome studies. So what's the average success rate of the average person?
I wouldn't even give you a number, because I don't believe them. I've seen so many outcome studies.
Right.
And the two things question is, have we talked to the person, or have we talked to the person and their friends and family and maybe coworkers? Because if it's self-reporting, we look at apples to apples. If we look at outcome studies for abstinence-based therapy, most people say they're not very good. And then I've seen some outcome studies on MAT, for instance, that look very, very good. If you ask a researcher, ask someone who really studies research, and they'll look at things like, okay, they successfully took their medication, they haven't been arrested, those are all good things. Were they drinking and taking other drugs during that time? Were they drug testing them while they were on that? Some programs do drug tests, some programs don't. So I'd be more likely to believe outcome stuff, a MAT program that was also doing a urine screen for alcohol and other drugs, than one that wasn't. There was a period of time in Florida years ago, they said no one died from that had Suboxone in their system. But then we found out they weren't testing for Suboxone when people died. So how do we know?
Right.
I had a guy come into treatment who had an alumni call the week before, and when the alumni person from the place I called him, he said he was doing great, going to meetings, had a sponsor, A week later, he checked himself detox and said he had a drink in his hand. We're talking to the person doing the outcome study. So again, I believe doctors because they test them.
Yeah. What is the success rate of physicians that are tested and followed?
Physicians that first 5 years was over 85%. When they first did that study, I read it lasted about 15 years, and I think it was still over 80%. We're still abstinent. It was thousands of doctors in a couple of different state programs. And then now 20 more years. I don't know what the stats are, but typically if someone can get 5 years, like if someone can get a year, their chances of remaining abstinence goes significantly higher.
Right.
You know, it's kind of the opposite when you look at prevention programs. If a man or a woman starts using, a child starts using 12, they're about 50 addicted. If they start at 15, they're like 30% chance to become addicted. If they start at 18, it's like 20, and they start drinking and drugging 20 or older, it's about 10%, which is what the average for the population is. On the other hand, if people stay cleaner longer on the side when they're getting sober, their chances go up. So I love it, especially for young people, and I love programs like yours long term because I really believe it's not an evidence-based study, but it is over a couple of decades. And you do this if you're 12 now. Look at people get a 24-hour check. Look at how many people get a 30. Look at how many people get a 96 month, a year. It goes down each time there's a celebration. But for those people that get a year, a lot of them stay around for decades. You know, so yeah, you can get someone to a year, their chances go way up.
Well, yeah, I've what I heard was 67% of people that make it to a year make it to 5 years.
I would bet that's close.
And 85% of people that make it to 5 years make it for life. It's like that. I honestly don't know where those numbers come from, but it based upon my experience, that sounds about right to me. It's like when I got my 5-year chip, everybody said, "Congratulations, you're no longer a newcomer."
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like,
it takes 5 years to get your breath back and 5 more years to learn how to use them.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so now let's talk about sober living. What's why do you feel strongly about sober living after as part of someone's treatment plan?
Again, I think that we don't get to where we ask for help overnight. We don't get to where we're self-sustaining overnight. Look at it like if you wanted to go to become a lawyer, if you could not have to work, not have to raise a family, if you could just full-time law school, into law school. Law school's still not easy. Becoming a lawyer is not easy. It's easier than working full-time, raising a family, going to law school at night. Now, you can still be a lawyer, going to law school at night, raising a family, and working full-time. It's hard, you know? It doesn't mean it's easy, again, if you're just going to law school, but it's easier, I would propose. If you could, you want to run a marathon. A lot of people can run a marathon. If I could quit my job, have a masseuse, a trainer, a nutritionist, and just focus on running this marathon, it's not easy to run a marathon. Easier than working full time, raising a family, maybe going to law school, trying to get in shape to run a marathon. Okay, so getting clean and sober, changing your life. Can you walk into a meeting or a therapist appointment somewhere and change your life? Sure. Not easy. If you have the luxury of going to treatment, of going into sober living, of putting some time together, of not having to focus on all this other stuff and just immerse yourself in this thing, I think that translates. It's obviously easy, but it's going to be easier. That's why I'm a big fan of long-term sober living. I think the longer you can take time out, the longer you can focus on this, the less chance you'll ever have to go through something like this again.
Right. And it's really, it's the lifestyle habits, right? It's like people have lived life a certain way for 5, 10, 20, 30 years. And to just go to treatment for 30 to 60 days and where they're in a bubble and they're basically told what to do the entire day, all day long, where, I mean, it's easy. They're not even I mean, they might be triggered, but they're in a protected environment essentially. And when they go back out into the real world, if they go back to their old environment, it's too easy to go back to living the way that they were living. I mean, as soon as they get triggered, they're like, it's too easy.
There's an old timer that I was fortunate enough to meet a long time ago named Leo F. And Leo died 57 years sober. But I remember when I met Leo, he said, there were a lot of things that Leo said, but one of the things he said a lot, I'll back up. When I was leaving treatment, they suggested I go to sober living. And I absolutely felt fantastic. I felt so much better than when I got there. I thought I was ready to go take on the world. And you said it, I was in a bubble. I was in a bubble for a period of time. And what Leo used to say is you need to develop the defense against the first drink. You know, when it talk about people they pick up and they don't know what happened, it was just a mental blind spot or whatever. Well, when real life happens, when you're out of treatment, you're out of that bubble and you haven't accept life on life's terms, whether it's work or family or, you know, all the daily stresses of being human, at 30 days, really most of us aren't prepared for that. And if you can immerse yourself with a group of people in a sober living and learn how to, like I said earlier, go through death and job rejection and relationship stuff and all the stuff we need to handle without running into a drink or a drug, having those training wheels, if you will, of a sober living environment, and then not only learning how to deal with that stuff, but learning how to have fun. I don't know if you remember, I remember vividly my first sober dance. You know, I felt like Steve Martin in The Jerk. And, you know, I had to learn how to do that. It was kind of relearning all of those things. And I really, truly believe if people aren't having fun in recovery, they probably won't stick around. Mm-hmm. So if you're with a group of people that are playing softball, you know, if you like golf, if you like fishing, if you like skydiving, whatever it is you like that floats your boat, boating, go out and do that with the people that you're in the sober living with. You're going to learn how to have fun. You're probably going to stick around longer. And again, when we're in treatment, we felt so bad going in. We feel so good coming out. We don't think we need anything else. We're ready to go home. And I'll tell you from experience, I went back to Boston to get my car and I was going to drive to Florida with my dad. And I really thought they were making too big a deal of this. You know, I was ready to go home, but, you know, they said, a lot of people suggested I just follow directions. So I'm like, fine. I was only in Boston a couple of hours and I went from on top of the world to all this anxiety and fear in an instant and nothing happened. I flew home. I got off the plane. I went to downtown Boston. I was walking to go meet a good friend and client for lunch. And it was like the heat stepping off the plane in Scottsdale or in Palm Beach. All of a sudden, I didn't have the life skills to deal with how I was feeling. And I remember at that moment thinking, thank God I agreed to go to the sober living. And that's what I would suggest to people early on. If you're open-minded, stay open-minded. If they're suggesting it, there's a good reason. And it's not because they're going to get rich off you. It's because you can benefit from it and you have the opportunity to do it. A lot of people don't have the opportunity to take that time out. You're a family, you've got commitments and things that you might not be able to take that time out and go do the extra time. If you have the opportunity to do it, why wouldn't you give yourself the best shot possible? And I think by committing to sober living, to immersing yourself in the program, you give yourself the best shot possible.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I've seen it happen so many times where people say, I just want to get back to living my life. You know, get back to living like I want to go back to living my life. if you go back to living your life, you're going to end up back in treatment. You know, there's an integration process. My experience, there's an integration process that has to happen in order for people to get to a healthy place where they're making healthy choices, and then they're ready to go back and live back in their old environment.
And for people that want to look at this from a scientific perspective, there is science to back this up. We have done brain scan studies on people on heroin, cocaine, amphetamine, and the brain changes over time. It can happen over 30 days, but you can see it at 6 months, at a year, at 3 years, 5 years. The brain heals itself and the neural pathways change. So if you've only got 30 days, you go into these stressful situations, you're going to react very similar to 30 days earlier, even without the drugs and alcohol. If you get a couple of years, let's say, where you haven't had a drink or a drug, your brain is actually healed, and there's less likely for those neural pathways to be all scattered. They're going to form new neural pathways where you're going to make better decisions. You're going to see things more clearly. It is, you know, if you Google some of these brain scans, Dr. Daniel Amen, Karen Foundation, Hazelden, I'm sure there's a Johns Hopkins probably all over now. And I haven't done it in a while, but I've been looking at them for years. It'll show you pictures of the brain. Here's the brain, you know, on drugs. It's a dental commercial. Here's your brain, you know, 2 years off drugs. You will see a big, big difference. And again, if you look at 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, is the progression of the brain healing. So again, for any of you people out there that want facts and want data, we have scientific studies on that part of it.
Michael, what's the best thing about recovery?
God, you know, me, I can all sum it up. There's so many things, but I'll sum it up. If you're dog lovers, you'll get it. I heard a guy early on say, "I'm finally the man my dog always thought I was."
Love it.
I get to be a brother, a son, a husband, a father, a grandfather, an employee, an employer, all the things I wanted to be. And, you know, I'll leave you with this. I had a really good friend, Brian. Brian was one of the first kids in my neighborhood to get sober. And for years, when I mentioned earlier the guys that got sober, I'd say, "How you doing, Brian?" And he'd say, "I'm okay with Brian today." And I used to think maybe he did too much acid when I was younger or whatever. And I get that today. Like, I'm okay with Michael today. And that's the best thing to me about recovery. I'm okay with Michael today.
Like, you like Michael.
Yeah.
And I can relate. I like Tim. I like spending time with Tim today. Tim's a good person. I feel good about my
good one. Somebody said to me the other day, you know, I hear a lot, you know, find someone who's got what you want, you know, and ask them to mentor them, to sponsor them. And a guy said, find somebody who's got what he wants. You know, if somebody has what they want, not what someone else has, they're probably in a good mental space.
Yeah, there you go. I think we're about ready to wrap up. Tell us how can people find you if they'd like to find you or reach out to you?
Anybody can call me anytime. My cell phone number is 561-346-2005. I'm an open book. If I've got information, I'm happy to share it. I also have a website. It's mwinterventions.com. That's mwinterventions.com. And if you are struggling, if you know is struggling, people like me out there that have been through it, we've got experience, and we'll be happy to share it. So if you don't find me, find someone in your town, do a little work on them. I would. One pet peeve of mine with this, as I was quoted years, I think it was the LA Times, people spend more time picking out a pair of shoes or a purse than they do a professional. So if you're checking out a treatment professional, shop for it, do your homework, ask around, get a couple of opinions, because there is a lot of misinformation on the internet. But there are so many good people programs out there. Do your work, you'll find somebody that fits. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate your time. Have a great day.
Thanks, Tim.
Bye.